Thank you for joining us today. This is session 3, Understanding Our Grant Process, Jewish Education and FOGELMAN Jewish Family Service, Overseas Lemsky, and Community Grants. Bluma will be leading the Overseas Lemsky session as Scott Nodowich has some technical issues. I want to thank Gary Kaplan and Steve Libby for taking time out of their busy schedules to lead their discussions. If you have any questions during the discussion, please use the Zoom chat function. We will do our best to answer the questions at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, I will get answers and email them to you. Now I'd like to turn it over to Gary.
And average that out and to establish a percentage to start with on an annual basis that would be allocated to the education number. So that's when we switched over to this particular method. So we basically have the unrestricted local dollars, and we take a percentage of that to determine what that number would be that we then divide up. And Michael will be going over those numbers with you. But we continue to provide scholarships for camp. And I think that that's 12% of the amount that we allocate from unrestricted local dollars. And it's running about $45,000 to $50,000 a year, and we're going to be back into it this year, it appears. We also set aside $50,000 that we provide for collaborative efforts between the two schools, Margolin and the Hebrew Academy. Margolin Hebrew Academy and Bornbloom, to give them some incentive to lower each of their institutions' overhead in various ways. And of course, somewhere right after we did that, somewhere along the line, the pandemic hit, and it made it very difficult for them, obviously, to take their efforts and transfer them into that. But we did basically, I think it was last year, begin a school counselor program that is shared by both institutions. That basically, it obviously prevented each institution from having to get their own counselor. And it was a collaboration from them. And they're also working on collaborative efforts for the coming year as well. And that over time, we hope that additional areas of need will be generated through that $50,000. And again, would allow the schools to keep their individual overheads under some greater degree of control. We also provide religious school scholarships to the two religious schools. That would be the Temple Israel Religious School and to the Beth Shalom Religious School. And we do that based on the number of children involved in the process. And it's basically a $75 per student allocation. And the schools along this line do presentations to us annually on what they're doing, how they're using those dollars, and just in general, what's going on at their particular institutions. The two schools, the two-day schools, Margolin and Bornbloom, they received a stipend per student as well at this point. The kindergarten gets like let's say that the regular school, high school gets 125% of a student allocation. The regular day school from 1 till high school gets $1,000 per student, and the kindergarten gets 40% of that, or $400 per student. And again, Michael will be going over those numbers. Now, these aren't the only dollars. These come out of the allocations process, but these are not the only dollars being raised on behalf of Jewish education in Memphis. We have also, there's money available to these institutions, obviously out of the COVID emergency fund. There's money available to these institutions from the Lemsky allocation dollars. And then there's money available to these institutions on our community needs list that we put out, that Federation puts out, I think monthly. And they have basically, I think, probably gotten close to $150,000 more dollars by those efforts than just the allocation out of the unrestricted campaign. So we're trying to approach taking care of Jewish education from multiple methods in order to ensure that that their needs are being met and that the dollars are there available for them. They both schools, have continuing on, both Margolin and Warmbloom have ongoing annual fundraising efforts. And we're there to supplement that with our commitment to Jewish education, which I think is the biggest single line item in our unallocated distribution. I mean, undesignated distribution every year. So it shows the level of support that we as an institution want to provide to Jewish education, obviously realizing the long-term import of connecting our children to Jewish education and Jewish life in an increased way. And just saw that Laura put on there that there's some security monies available as well. They're also part of our security overall committee, where we have a group that gets together for security updates and discussions. And obviously the schools, as well as the synagogues, are participants in that program as well. Is there anything that you can think of that I left out, Laura, that's pertinent? So I think the big issue was switching from the scholarship programs a number of years ago to be sure that we arrived at what was going to be an equitable method moving forward to, and kind of take the, by setting up a specific percent based on a 7-year rolling average, it allows it kind of takes the responsibility away from the allocations committee, depending upon, because what you really didn't want to see over time is that they're going to be, obviously, in a community like ours, you're going to have advocates for those institutions involved in the process, and they're going to be rightfully so advocating for their institution. And you don't want to get into a situation where at one point in time there's, heavier Warmbloom participation or heavier academy participation, and then it swings back the other way. So this was a much more equitable way to move forward, and I think that the parties are pleased with how things have worked out. And they also do present to us, to our finance review committee and the school review committee. We have an education committee that reviews with them as well, their ongoing practices. We do an evaluation of their financials with a separate finance committee. And, in general, we have a pretty good handle on the institutions that we're funding to justify and to be sure that the dollars that our donors are providing to us from the unrestricted funds are being well spent. So, Michael, I'll turn it back to you for further explanations, but if I missed something, come back at me.
Well, I'll come back at you in a minute for FOGELMAN, but yes, thank you. So I'd like to go over now with you the breakdown of the education funding for 2021-2022. We have based all our figures on a projected $2.3 million unrestricted campaign. Using this fluid figure, we will have $1,014,564 available for local grants. Approximately 38% of this $1,014,565 figure, $379,853, along with the estimated local grant surplus, totals $392,914, which is granted for Jewish education. 12% of that total, $47,150, is granted for camp scholarships along with a $1,000 administration fee. $50,000 is set aside for collaboration efforts between Warmbloom and Margolin. $75 per student is awarded for religious school students, $2,400 to Beth Shalom, and $23,175 to Temple. The remaining dollars, $269,189, is split among Warmbloom, Margolin, and Temple based on the census and factor assigned to kindergarten, 1st through 8th, and 9 through 12. Warmbloom will receive $92,991. Margolin will receive $172,098, and Temple will receive $4,100. I've included a 2-year summary in the shaded table at the right of the PowerPoint slide for your review. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Gary for FOGELMAN Jewish Family Service.
Okie doke. Let me see. Do you have a thing? Okay, so basically I'll start here by giving a bit of background too. A number of years ago, obviously, Jewish Family Service was a standalone agency. And I think at that time, the Honorable Counselor Steve Libby was chairman of that organization at that point. And we put together a group of Federation people and center people to determine how best to move forward with family service at that time. And it was determined by the group that the best way to do that would be to have the center manage that and for Federation to financially support that effort. So we had an agreement that basically after a certain number of year period, about 5-year period, we would get back together again and check on the progress of how that was working, determine if with continuing with the center was the best way to move forward, or should we go back to a standalone agency. And so about last June or July, we set up a committee of people from both the center and Federation to go over this, to develop a strategic plan for moving forward with family service. And we basically had Dr. Barbara Prescott be our facilitator, and she did a great job. She was wonderful to work with. And those of you that know Barbara are not surprised at that, I'm sure, having worked with her in the past. So we set that up, and also as part of that, we had the last 2 processes of that committee were an organizational structure committee and also a financial evaluation committee. And the financial review committee of that group set up a 5-year budget moving forward for Jewish Family Service. It was done in collaboration with us and the JCC. So as you can see here, last year, Federation awarded $438,000, of which $256,000 came from their unrestricted donations. Over the last few years, Laura has been raising designated dollars that would be going to family service from a pretty strong donor base of people that are committed to that organization. In lieu of that, on an ongoing basis, to the size that it has been historically, we decided the best way to work on financial stability, sustainability.
Harry had mentioned he may have some technical issues and he would jump back on his iPad. So I think we'll just go ahead and give him a minute. Otherwise, I could try to jump in and go over the bullet points with him.
Michael, why don't you continue until he gets back on?
I can do that. Well, next we have would be Bluma for overseas and Lemsky. We can do that and then jump back to this if you like. You want me to continue with the bullet points that?
I would just continue. Well, let's finish up JFS and then we'll go to overseas.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So as Gary had mentioned, that that we'd set up a financial review committee to assist and oversee FOGELMAN Jewish Family Services along with the group. We, as a group, awarded to the to FJFS $438,000, of which $256,000 came from our unrestricted donations. We started working on our financial stability for FJFS, and here is Gary. So I want to hold that. I don't want to go too fast. We let him jump back in. All right. Gary, you're on mute.
Okie doke. I had to switch to my iPad. So sorry about that. My computer went dead on me. So the endowment is freeing up unrestricted dollars and reduced a reliance on the campaign over time. And we will probably still continue with some designated gifts into the future. But as it says, we're only taking $66,000 from the general campaign this year. And $87,000 from above and beyond gifts to fulfill the total commitment of 154. I think over time that commitment over the next 5 years goes down to about 105, 110. And so in general, I think that we've done a pretty good job of guaranteeing the sustainability of FOGELMAN Jewish Family Service and also to improve over time on the already good job that the center has been doing through a little more community outreach and marketing and things of this nature, to be sure we're reaching all the people in the community that need to be reached, that need the assistance of family service. Anything else needs to be included in there, Laura?
All right, Gary. Well, thank you, Gary. And we're going to turn it over now to Overseas and Lemsky to Bluma.
Do you want to go over those numbers, Michael?
As far as the numbers that would come up on the grant section for the community grants with Steve Libby, he'll be able to show a little bit more on that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, everybody. Scott sends his regrets. He was planning on doing this presentation, but he's out of town and didn't realize that he would have very spotty cell phone and internet access. So I'm stepping in for him. So on last week's Israel and Overseas session, we learned about our Israel and Overseas agenda and about the two buckets that we have to support that agenda, the annual campaign and the Lemsky Endowment Fund. We heard from Scott and guest speakers, David Butler from JFNA and representatives from our overseas partners, Jaffe, JDC, and from Andy Groveman about our unrestricted grant that goes to JFNA and how it's divided up among Jaffe and JDC. That session was recorded, so you can go back and listen to that if you missed it. In addition to our unrestricted grant from the annual campaign, we have several designated grants from the campaign, including funding the Memphis Shoham Partnership, Birthright Israel, and a grant to support the poor and elderly in Kharkov, Ukraine. And the specific funding amounts of those grants will be reviewed tomorrow at the budget wrap-up session, since they are part of the budget waterfall. So today, I'd like to focus on the Lemsky grants process. So last week, Scott gave the historical overview for the Lemsky Fund. And just to review, the mission is to build bridges between Memphis Jews and Israel. At any one time, we have about between 10 and 12 community members who sit on the Lemsky committee, and we meet 2 to 3 times a year. The process starts in January of every year, where we open up applications for our 3 buckets: immersive Israel experiences for Memphis Jews, local Israel engagement programs, and social service and Jewish identity building programs in Israel, sponsored by our overseas partners. The committee meets and reviews applications. For the local engagement programs, we hear presentations from our agencies, we score and discuss the proposals. And for the 3rd bucket, the committee tries to go to Israel every 2 years to see and evaluate our partners' programs. Every year we have roughly $500,000 to grant. And the last 2 years, we actually had more because of surplus generated by COVID. If you look at the slide, you can see the Lemsky Committee recommendations for this year, for the next fiscal year. The first section is the immersive Israel experiences. We have sending high school students, post-high school to Israel. And you'll see that there was a big drop in what was granted from 2021 to 21-22, because we had put in extra for 2021 because all the Israel trips were canceled last year. So we put in extra, anticipating that all those kids would go on programs this year. And then we anticipate, and those programs look like they're all going through, so we anticipate that next year we'll go back to the normal level, which is about $60,000 that we grant to that. We have the 2 day schools have trips to Israel. We give need-based scholarships to first-time adults. We give a flight scholarship if they've never been to Israel and they have need. And then there are various missions, Federation-sponsored and JFNA-sponsored missions. So that's the first section that comes out to a total of $265,850. Then we have the bucket of local Israel engagement programs. We have the Kolel Torah Mitzion, which is the couple and the 3 to 4 young men post-army service who come to Memphis, who are primarily based at MHA, but who go out to the entire community to bring Israel engagement to all demographics. They regularly go to Born-Bloom, they go to Hillel, Plow Towers, the Home. They work with the JCC, so they're out in the community. We also support the Shlicha and the Israel Center at the JCC Center for Jewish Living and Learning. We support the Israel Festival. Last year there was no Israel Festival, so that's why there's no funds there. A wonderful program that's in its second year of funding is the Memphis NCSY Scholars Program, and that is a program to train high school teens in Israel education and advocacy so that they'll be prepared to confront issues when they get to college. And that's been very successful. And we support Temple Israel's Institute for Reform Zionism, which is comprised of different elements of bringing Israel to the Temple Israel community. This year we got 2 new applications. We were excited to get new applications. The Jewish Home wants to bring Israel engagement to its residents. So they have a grant. They're going to do virtual programs. They're going to hire Israeli tour guides and take residents on virtual tours of Israel. And Born-Bloom has a new program to really introduce Born-Bloom students to Israeli agriculture and nature and the whole concept of working the land. And they're going to learn all about that. And then they're going to try and create their own Israel-based garden at Born-Bloom. So we're excited about those programs as well. Then there is the Israel engagement programs that Federation sponsors, the Israel Scout Friendship Caravan that comes every summer. We also have 2 Israeli Scouts, but those are funded through an endowment. And coming up in 2023 is Israel's 75th anniversary, a major milestone. And we would like to have a whole year of celebrations and projects and really trying to rally the community behind Israel's 75th anniversary, including missions and projects. So we're going to start off with a Israel at 75 project coordinator to manage that celebratory year. And then the final bucket that you see on the slide are the social service and Jewish identity building programs that we support in Israel. And we have 3 Jewish agency programs. Nativ is a Jewish identity building program for Israeli soldiers who are not considered halachically Jewish by Israel and are interested in exploring Judaism, either to convert, but even not necessarily, just to have them understand what they are fighting for and what it means to be in the state of Israel. Mechinat Or Yehuda is a pre-army program that helps those at risk who might not even be accepted into the army, prepares them for the army and for future employment. So that's a wonderful program. And then Youth Futures provides mentors to middle school children who are at risk. And the mentors, work with them in school and out of school to make sure that they stay and are on the right track to get to high school, to graduate, and to move forward in Israeli society. And we also give a grant. This, for the first time, we gave a grant to the 3rd JFNA partner, World ORT, for a dropout prevention in one of the youth villages in Israel. So all helping at risk. And then we also give a grant to support a Jewish identity building and Jewish peoplehood to a program sponsored by the Israel Movement for Reform Judaism. So as you can see, we really work hard on bringing Israel engagement, both at home and in supporting Israel abroad. And it's a wonderful committee, and I think it's a great process.
Thank you, Bluma. And I want to remind everybody that if you have questions, so please put them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them after everybody's finished. I'd like to turn it over to Steve Libby now to talk about community grants.
Hey, I'm Steve Libby, and I'm going to talk about community grants. The Community Grants Committee is a great committee. It really is. It's important to the community. It's makes very important decisions regarding funding and the priorities of our Jewish community. I have been very blessed and pleased to serve with Sarah Lewis as the chair. I think Sarah Lewis is on. I didn't see her screen, but I would look forward to seeing her face because she's wonderful. The agencies we primarily support, as we kind of went through, Jewish Family Service is kind of handled separately and the schools are handled separately. We support several different, or we make this funding decisions on several different organizations. And it's really a great committee because you get to learn about the services that Federation helps support and also the different real wonderful agencies that are partners of the Federation. Just kind of run through them. I'll just kind of look at them in alphabetical order or move around. BBYO, which we all know is our teens that are not necessarily affiliated with the synagogue. We also work with each one of the synagogue high schools, MEFT, NCSY, and USY. Facing History, obviously they do wonderful work with their schools and teachers, giving them education and materials regarding Holocaust, anti-Semitism, or so many other important topics. Jewish Children Regional Service is really a great organization. It's interesting, as you notice on the screen that's up, we give them $7,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 a year, and they give the Memphis Jewish community about $35,000 a year in scholarships to people going to college and then also to camp. It's it's just an interesting thing that they're asking for money, even though they're giving us more money than we give them. Jewish Community Center, we all know about that. We help support most of, Jewish activities primarily with them. The Jewish Home, again, they do wonderful work. We help them with kosher meals and so many other things. Plow Towers, primary support that we give is for a Jewish Activities Director, and they're just a wonderful steward of the money that we allocate to them, as a grant. So those are just some of the organizations that Federation supports. We have in our community, it's really neat. I mean, our partner agencies are really good. They're really well run. They are financially responsible. This year has obviously been a real challenge. They've had to, cut payrolls, modify programming, a lot of insecurity regarding, what's going to happen this year. So many organizations' revenues are way down. They can't do traditional fundraising, we're getting people together and asking for money. So a lot of insecurity. So we tried to work with that as best we could. And, with the pandemic, we don't know the long-term effects of it. One thing about our organizations, they're all wonderful stewards of our money. I really highly recommend, if you ever have opportunity to be on the Community Grants Committee, that you do, because I think you'll find it really rewarding, and you'll learn about a lot about where the money goes. So what we did this year, which was kind of what we did a little bit last year, but we went into it with the attitude of, let's start with the premise of trying to grant everyone the same amount we did last year, because again, they're making their budgets effective July, and they just want to be able to know what they can count on. I mean, obviously, so many of them kind of had the PPP plan that really helped them last year, and don't know what's happening next year. So again, that was our goal. So to try to make it a little easier on our organizations, rather than doing where we used to do our full meeting, and we'd bring them in front of it was kind of like Shark Tank. They'd come into the conference room at the JCC and present, and question and answers, etc. We gave them this year kind of a more abridged application We had 1 to 2 members of our committee meet separately with each one of the partner agencies, kind of went through, what do you really need? What can Federation do for you, monetary or non-monetary? And most of the organizations actually said, you know, we're doing okay. I mean, the Federation has helped, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, outside of their regular allocations, so many of these organizations, to where they really, again, were so responsible and worked with their funding and, you know, personnel and other costs and programming, that they were able to, you know, most indicated that if they got what they got last year, that'd probably be, you know, very appreciated, and they'd at least be able to predict what they could spend this upcoming year. So that's the way we handled the primary agencies. The youth groups, excuse me, that's what's calling it. The youth groups we handle a little bit separately because it's such a crapshoot, for want of a better term. You know, so much of what the youth groups do is scholarships for conventions, travel, and things like that. And we don't know what they're going to be able to use that. And obviously they don't either, with the pandemic and how that's going to kind of go through. So we actually allowed the youth groups to come to present to the full group and kind of explain what their goals and intentions were for the upcoming year. I mean, it was kind of interesting. Youth groups also are handled differently than all of our other agencies. They get what are called reimbursement grants, which if we give them $20,000 and they only spend $4,000, well, then that other $16,000 is never allocated. If, you know, the JCC, we're giving a dollar certain amount of money. So last year, and these numbers may be a little bit old, but last year we allocated, or we granted $40,000 approximately to the youth groups. And through a couple of months ago, they had only used less than $10,000. If there's money out there, I'm sure they're trying to find a way to utilize it now and request it. But so when we allocate money to the youth groups, it's really a low risk thing, because if they don't use it, then, you know, we still retain it. So Gary made some reference to it earlier about some of the funding that Federation does outside of the allocations committee. And I just wanted to kind of touch base on that, because, you know, this year Plow Towers and Jewish Home both had some needs that were, bless you, Eileen, were outside of, you know, the typical, what they needed, you know, security and virus testing. Both of them needed some extra money for security. So outside of the general campaign funding process, we gave Jewish Home $28,600 on May 20th, Plow Towers about $28,000 on that same time. Other money was given to the Hebrew Academy and Margolin, Baron Hirsch and Bornbloom. But I'm just kind of looking at our agencies. That's through the urgent needs requests. Through our community needs list, Plow Towers got another $27,000. The Jewish Community Center got about another $15,000. We have donor directed gifts. So all I'm getting at is if there is a need of one of our partner agencies, if we can't grant it through the normal funding process, it's looked at specially, and if there are funds there, we're going to try to support them in any way we can. And I think that's a real tribute to, you know, Federation and to our community, that we look out for each other. Just a couple other things that I thought were worthy of noting when I say we're giving money outside of the funding process. We also have given money for school counselor, congregate meals, emergency assistance, funeral funding, Hillel, education, all things that are in addition to the numbers you're looking at in front of you. One last note before I look at those numbers. In past years, we've run a program called Fedivation, which was, we were trying to invite people to bring us new ideas, find unserved needs, and really with the priority toward collaboration between different organizations. Well, we've really got less applications for those in the last couple of years, and we've kind of converted that to a wellness program this year. And some money, I know the one that comes to mind is Jason Kaplan does work with the seniors, and isolated seniors is certainly a part of wellness. So we're still trying to serve that need, even though that again is handled outside of the allocation process. with regard to our allocation process, again, we have a wonderful committee. We got some newer, younger people on this year, which is just wonderful to kind of get some bright new outlooks in addition to the, the people that are more familiar with the services that are being provided each year. And again, we started with the presumption, let's try to fund as much close as we could to the same as last year. But we also wanted our grants committee to exercise their discretion and after review of the things, where did we think the priorities were greatest? Where could we help the most? So basically BBYO, Facing History, Jewish Community Center, Memphis Jewish Home, they all got about the same as last year. Most of the youth groups did too. I'll kind of touch base on some of the ones that got a different amount of funding. Jewish Children Regional Service, they last year got $12,000, and our group just thought, for an organization that's giving our teens and college students $35,000, it would be great to be able to give them a little bit more support. It seemed like there was a little bit of some surplus funds that we could utilize. So there was a vote, and they're allocating about $3,000 more to Jewish Children Regional Service. Plow Towers asked for, Plow Towers is just adorable. They said, can you give us $968 more so we could give a raise to our Jewish Activities Director? They're not, most of the, you would think somebody would say, well, can you give us $2,500, hoping to negotiate down, but they tell us exactly what they need. And that seemed like a very reasonable request. So that was approved. This is kind of a first for us. Beth Shalom asked for $1,200 to run its high school Jewish program. They tried to do it last year, it just didn't work. And they've had some change of staff. Rabbi Sarit's wonderful. We have a lot of confidence in Beth Shalom. We really want to see them do well. So they requested $1,200, but the group decided to grant them $2,000. So we actually gave more money than someone even requested, but we really would like to see them get off on a successful, start with the, the reorganization of their program. Something else that was really kind of new and interesting is each one of the youth groups came on, with the high school, and they just want a program. They just want to get out there. And the pandemic has just been, so kind of depressing for those guys. How many times can they play video games on their computer and, just have a bunch of computer type programs? So the group thought it would be great if we gave $5,000 for kind of what we called a teen collaborative effort. If they'll work together to do things together, we wanted to see them have a pot of money that they could, do something and get together, have some good time, just have engagement. So an additional $5,000 was allocated to that. As you can see on here, under the fifth line down, Jewish Education Scholarships, they're kind of highlighted. Last year was $406,000, and this year was $379,000. And again, that was out of the formula, and that's the way it worked out. It wasn't like we were cutting Jewish education, but the group voted that if there's additional local allocable funds that could be allocated, that we would try to bring the schools up to the same as last year and give about another $25,000 to the schools. And if any additional money comes in through the campaign, and I'm sure Jimmy and Jonathan will find a way to raise money above and beyond whatever was intended, then that would carry over into next year's campaign. But that's kind of the way the grants committee, works, and the way it's worked this year. Like I say, Sarah Lewis was a wonderful, wonderful addition. Michael Barnett, it was his first year working with us as staff, and he was extremely competent on top of everything and very helpful. Very rewarding committee, and that's kind of how we work. I didn't check the chats to see if there were any questions, but that's what we did.
Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate it. I also want to just restate, as far as FOGELMAN Jewish Family Service, that $87,242 was donor directed, plus the unrestricted request of $66,772 would be a total award of $154,014. I know we have one question that came into the chat so far, and I was going to let Bluma answer that question if she would.
Sure. So yes, We did an estimate of the projected surplus. We don't have the final numbers yet because some programs are still underway for this year, but we did do a projected surplus and we did carry it over into 21-22. One of the things that we did that you don't see on here is that since the Born Bloom and Academy trips to Israel were canceled for this year as well, we offered them each a grant of up to $5,000 to provide immersive Israel experience for their kids now. And Born Bloom actually took us up on the offer, and they had an incredible program with the tour guide that they would have used for their trip in Israel, and they had all these days worked out, and they visited different places in Israel. And one night the 8th grade kids slept over in the school, and they had Yuval, the shlicha, and she made an Israeli dinner with them. And so they were able to provide, not quite being in Israel, but as close as possible, an immersive experience. So that was where part of the surplus was used for that. And we anticipate that we'll have, after June 30th, when all the numbers are in, we'll probably have a little more surplus as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, if you think of any, please feel free to email me. I want to thank Gary, Bloom, and Steve one more time for leading the discussion. And we hope you join us either tomorrow noon or Monday at 5 p.m. for our last session, the final budget review. You can register for your selected session at jcpmemphis.org/leadershipstrong. And we've also put the link in the comment section. And it looks like we have one more question. Why don't we? Well, no, not a question. It was a great program. Thank you. All right, well, if anybody has any questions, once again, please feel free to email me and I'll make sure I get answers for you, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow or Monday. Thank you.